Okay, so welcome to our lunchtime webinar with PEDAL. My name is Marisol Basilio, and I am one of the research associates here at PEDAL. I will be chairing today's panel, and our speaker, Dr. Ed Baines from UCL's Institute of Education, will be talking to us about school break times as important social playtimes for children. Before we get started, I just want to run through a very short housekeeping list with you. We are using Zoom Webinar, which is a bit different from your usual Zoom account. As an attendee, you are muted and also your camera won't be used. If you have any questions, you can ask them through the Zoom Q&A interface below, and we will try to respond them after our speaker has presented. We will also be recording this webinar, so if you need to leave at any point due to childcare or any other pressing matters, please don't worry, you will be able to watch it later in our YouTube channel. The PEDAL Center is a research center at the Faculty of Education of the University of Cambridge. PEDAL stands for Play in Education, Development and Learning. We're a wonderful community of researchers all trying to understand the role of play in children's lives. Our three core aims are providing world-class research, building capacity in play research, and also influencing policy and practice. If you would like to learn more about our research, about current projects, past projects, and everything that we do, you can head to pedalhub.org.uk. You can also find us in Twitter and Instagram with the PedalCam handle. And you can also contact us by email at pedal@educ.cam.ac.uk. And we encourage you to follow us in social media and signing up to our mailing list using the QR code below. You're going to be able to see this in the recording of the session.
Okay, so thanks very much for inviting me to come and talk to you today. It's a shame that we're all still unable to meet up in person, but hopefully kind of live face-to-face events will be kind of possible soon. But it's really great to be here and to come and talk to you. I'm going to be talking to you, as Marisol said, about some of the results from our most recent, or the most recent of our national surveys of school break times. This was undertaken in 2017-2018, and the report published in 2019. And the full kind of technical report, along with research briefings and all sorts of other things, are available from our web pages, our website, which is listed there. I should say this was the kind of the third of the third and most recent survey of school break times. All three of these surveys have been funded by the Nuffield Foundation. The first was undertaken by Peter Blatchford and Claire Sumpner in 1995, and then the second and the third by Peter Blatchford and myself in 2006 and then 2017. So these surveys provide a kind of 20 to 25 year long view of the nature and organisation of children's break times in school in England. And the data they provide are pretty unique, certainly in this country, but also internationally. So we've not really encountered any other studies that provide a similar level of depth and detail about these times in school. I was hoping to have some more recent or current data to talk to you about, as we've got three small scale surveys currently underway that are exploring the adjustments to break times that schools have had to make during the pandemic. As well as kind of school staff views and thoughts about what they might sustain beyond, as things return, hopefully as things return to normal. Unfortunately, the data are being analysed at the moment, so I haven't got anything to share with you, but hopefully later on this summer, there will be some things coming out. So before getting on to the research, I just wanted to kind of acknowledge the many others that have collaborated and helped out with this research. So they're listed here. We also had a very helpful and supportive advisory group, which included David Whitebread, and much support came from him and from the advisory group. So we're very grateful to them for that. Okay, this is the plan for the next 25 minutes or so. Initially, I hope to quickly run through some background points. I suppose it's fairly typical plan for kind of a research presentation, but I'll then move on to talk about study aims, the sample and methods, and then report on some of the findings from the project, and then pick up some points of discussion and implications at the end. It's fair to say that these survey projects cover a wide range of issues to do with children's social lives within primary and secondary schools. So there's a whole host of things that I won't be covering today to do with school clubs and use of mobiles and all sorts of things like that within school settings. So if you're interested in social life in schools, then it's worthwhile having a look at the full report. Okay. It's probably helpful to have some clarity on what we mean by break times. I'm often asked about, why I don't use the term playtime. And of course, in the States, they tend to use the term recess to refer to playtimes or break times. So on the whole, we tend to use break times and use these terms relatively interchangeably. But as I say, our preference is for break times. Simply because to include kind of primary and secondary schools as well as primary schools, where of course in secondary schools students are less likely to refer to these times as playtimes. We also incorporate lunch times as part of a break time. So in the UK, the context is, so in the UK, this context invariably includes time to eat a meal and time for recreation. They don't separate the two out. So we tend to use the term break time to refer to lunchtime. I suppose this is a fairly specific definition. I think the emphasis is on the freedom to socialize or to engage in self-chosen activity, but in semi-supervised contexts. Okay, I'm not going to go into an extended discussion about the importance or value of break times for children. These are covered and summarized elsewhere, some of the places listed here. But break times are a relatively unique context, at least within the school setting. There are a few times in school when a child is not under the direct supervision of an adult, or when an adult is not organizing what a child is doing. Breaks are examples of open settings. They're times when children make their own decisions about what they're going to do, how they go about it, and who they socialize with, and so on. And in order to participate in the activities, they often have to engage or negotiate with peers. So in many respects, break times have huge parallels with the kind of the social context that within which adults find themselves once they've formal schooling has come to an end. So they're kind of a glimpse of a wider world. And they offer a range of different opportunities. So again, some of those are listed here. I'm not going to go into this in any great detail. Maybe we can refer back to these things at the end. But lots of opportunities for children to develop skills and social skills and so on. From the perspective of policy, there's relatively little interest in school break times. There's no national policy on the length or on the nature of break times. There's no requirement for a break, although teachers, as part of employment law, do have a break. There are also no national statistics on these times, and there's little understanding generally. The only data available on school breaks in break times in this country come from, as far as we're aware anyway, comes from these studies. Okay, unlike most other things that schools do, it's unusual for them to have a kind of a policy on break times. So this is a point that Michael Follett, who developed the kind of OPAL program, has often made. And what this means is that they're not seen to fulfill a specific aim. And so in many respects, they're kind of fair game for staff, school staff, to try and find a few minutes here and there to chip away maybe for other kind of worthwhile activities in the school day. And in terms of the kind of views of school staff relative to break time, Historically, there's been a generally negative or relatively ambivalent view of breaks. School leaders are often concerned about managing these times, finding staff who can supervise them, as well as the kind of the issues and difficulties that arise that can arise during. There are also many other pressures on schools, and so, as I've kind of said, these sometimes can lead to, well, as we'll see, some reductions in breaks. Okay, and this was the kind of the context, I suppose, that led to the latest survey study of breaks. Okay, it's also the case that in some instances schools have questioned whether we need break times, and obviously it's healthy to have good debate about these, but quite often, well, in this instance, there was a kind of a misunderstanding about what breaks are like, and it's also fair to say that there are as many examples as there are of kind of a negative view of break times or play times. There are also positive views. So we've got an instance of this school in Peterborough that was trying to, or that was built without a playground and didn't have any plans for break time. And then there's also Google, which sees play as very much part of their provision and activities within the work environment. Okay, so onto the kind of the main aims of these surveys or these studies. So these were the aims for all three national surveys, designed to provide a kind of a description of current practices and experiences in relation to school breaks, as well as staff and student views about the role of break times and the challenges that are presented by these times. In terms of the methods, so all three studies involved a national survey of school leaders or head teachers. The 2006 and 2017 surveys also involved a separate survey of children and young people. And this aimed to kind of capture, I suppose, the other side of the story from the perspectives of children and young people in relation to break times. And also in terms of their social lives outside of school. There were also some case studies. These were related to 1995 and 2017 studies, but I'm not going to be talking about these today. Okay, in terms of the samples and response rates for the different studies, we can see here that we've got the kind of each of the different surveys in relation to the sample approach, the response rates, and so on. As you can see, for each well, we approached a random sample of schools, and each time we've increased the number of schools that we've approached in order to try and sustain similar levels of response. And overall, the percentage of schools that have been involved in these studies have been around 5 or 6%. So it's important to remember that these are not these are cross-sectional studies. It's not a longitudinal study. It can be easy to kind of forget that. The other thing to flag up is that we were able to relate our data to national data sets, so that we're confident that the final samples that we've got have been representative of schools within England. In terms of the areas of focus then, in terms of the school survey, so these were the main areas. The survey itself focused on things to do with durations and number and timings of break times, as well as the number of pupils in school and a variety of things like that. We also collected data on supervision, so the numbers of adults and the approach to school supervision of break times. There was information on playground resources and equipment that were available, as well as their quality. Access that children had to different parts of the playground, either when it's raining or, whilst they're on play. We also collected information about the withholding of breaks, clubs and activities, both during break times and before and after school, and then also staff attitudes towards breaks. So a wide range of things, as I said. In terms of the surveys of pupils' social life in and outside of school, these are the kind of the data. We collected data from year 5, year 8 and year 10 pupils at those different time points. And that was from over 1,000 students. These were students that were attending the schools that had participated in the school survey. So all schools that were contacted as part of the survey were asked if they would participate in the student survey. And from those that agreed, we selected a random sample that was geographically dispersed across England. And these are the figures in terms of the numbers of schools. And these are the kind of the question areas that we focused on. In 2006, we also focused on kind of travel to and from schools and a couple of other things, pocket money and so on. But again, I'm not going to be talking about those today. Okay, so on to some findings then. I'm going to be talking about the findings just largely from the 2017 data and then any relevant changes from earlier survey points. The analyses and kind of findings are largely descriptive. As was the case in 1995 and 2006, we found that school break times were universally experienced. We didn't find any schools that did not have a break of some sort. There were a few schools that didn't have an outdoor area, didn't have a kind of playground or didn't have a field where children could go during a break time. And there were a few schools where children had to, I suppose, travel or walk to a playground. But most schools had between 2 and 3 breaks, usually one in the morning and the second around lunchtime. But there were just a few departures from that. Okay. So in terms of the number and durations of breaks, on average, so the data provides information of the age groups. So we've got Key Stage 1 or kind of infant stage, the junior schools or Key Stage 2, and then secondary schools in relation to the timings of the breaks. So the morning break, the lunchtime break, and then an afternoon break. We've also got information on the total amount of time for breaks, the percentage of the school day it made up. And then this is a correlation between the total amount of break time, it's listed there, and the percentage of free school meals. So what we can see from the table is that on average, primary schools tended to have a 15-minute break in the morning and lunch breaks of less than, well, around about 60 minutes, an hour long. As I've mentioned already, this included time to eat a meal. In terms of afternoon breaks, so the data here presented in red represent the percentage of schools that had afternoon breaks. So you can see that most schools at Key Stage 1, over half of them, just over half of them, reported having an afternoon break, whereas this quickly dropped off at Key Stage 2 and then almost completely was gone at secondary school level. Secondary schools, by comparison to primary schools, tended to have a 20-minute break in the morning and a lunch break of about 45 minutes, although there was quite a substantial portion of schools that only had, I think it was about 35 minutes or less. It was about 25% of schools, secondary schools, had 35 minutes or less. Sorry, the other thing I should flag up here is that these data are for mainstream funded schools. These don't include the data for independent schools. And what we tended to find was that in terms of the total amount of break time for independent schools, it was around about 90 minutes right across the board. So at Key Stages 1 all the way through in secondary school, the schools that were involved, the independent schools that were involved, reported break times of around about 90 minutes, and that tended to relate to about 20% of the school day. In terms of the correlation, so we found a negative correlation between the total amount of time for breaks and the proportion of pupils in the school that received a free school meal. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, kind of the percentage free school meals is often taken as a proxy measure for kind of socioeconomic disadvantage within the school environment. What this means is that pupils in schools with disadvantaged pupils were likely to have less time for breaks than other schools. And although, you know, the correlation or the negative correlation itself is relatively weak at 0.25, this is significant. And it might be, there's a whole host of possible explanations. It might be things to do with the need to manage behaviour or to create more time for learning, an extended school day perhaps, or to allow students to kind of go home early, or there's a range of things. It's also important to remember that these data don't include the data for the independent schools, because the free school meals doesn't relate to that sector. So in some respects, if we're taking an overall picture, it's likely that there is a much stronger relationship here between the length of break times and socioeconomic sort of disadvantage. It's also important to flag up that this just relates to the primary schools and didn't relate to secondary schools. So secondary school settings were a different setup or situation. Okay, in terms of changes, so examining the durations of break times across the 3 surveys, overall our findings showed a decline in the average amount of break time children get per day. So again, we've got primary schools and secondary schools, and then the different surveys. And these figures here are the total amount of time for breaks. As we see, well, yeah, we've got an indication down here of the total change between 1995 and 2017. So compared to the 1995 figures, the youngest children get 45 minutes less per week break time. At Key Stage 2, it's about 40 minutes less per week, and then at secondary school, they have had their breaks cut the most, so it's about 65 minutes less break time per week. So about the equivalent of a whole 1 day's whole breaks per week. These changes are largely due to reduction in afternoon breaks and also the shortening of lunchtime breaks. So we found a substantial reduction between 1995 and 2006 in terms of the loss of afternoon breaks, but then between 2006 and 2017 there was a decline in the lunch breaks as well. So these are quite marked over the past 22 years, and it is likely that, given the kind of current COVID pandemic, that there are, you know, these might have been shortened further, given the need to maintain social contact and maintain social distancing, avoid social contact, and to maintain bubbles. Okay, what about some of the reasons for the reductions? So largely these were, the schools reported that reductions were to create more time for learning. So schools have long been trying to extend instruction time by reducing break times. And this is followed by a concern to manage or reduce behaviour difficulties that sometimes can arise. And then some other reasons were to build in a bit more time for physical activity, so the daily mile in this one example here. And then also some schools reported wanting to shorten the school day, to allow students to kind of leave school earlier. And this was particularly the case in terms of, you know, the reduced budgets that many schools were experiencing or have been experiencing over the past 10 years. Now, those reductions, these conflict with students' views on break time. So this table here with the green reports the views that children have of break times, and in particular this is in relation to lunchtime, so when children were not eating. And what we found for all break times, including wet break, that children overwhelmingly enjoyed these times. They were very positive about them. And this was the case at all age levels. So pupils were overwhelmingly positive. and very few report saying that they dislike break time. Children and young people, felt that break time preferred break time over other parts of the school day. So certain types of lessons and eating time, and to some degree preferred it over coming to school. But most children thought that break time was about the right length or not long enough, and it was particularly the case that secondary school students felt that it was not long enough, and they also felt they should have more time for breaks. And what is particular about these data, I think, is they're very, very similar at 2006 and 2017, even though they involve different sets of students. So there's some continuity in that view over time. In terms of, whereas kind of questions relating to the number and duration of break times over this, cover the situation for most students, we were very aware, anecdotally, of schools where the withholding of break times is used as a means to kind of manage learning behaviours. And we wanted to get a fuller picture of how widespread this practice was or is. So another question on the most recent survey was about the extent to which children might miss out on a full break time. And we've got data here from both the schools and also from the pupils. And so we found that around 60% of primary and secondary schools said that pupils might miss a full break time or lunchtime. That was much higher than we'd expected. And a range of different reasons were given as to why, including things like attending sports competitions and so on. But I think what's most important here is that over half of all primary schools, so close to 60%, said that they might prevent children from having a break due to kind of poor behaviour in class or during break times, or to finish off class work or even homework. In secondary schools, it was a similar level, so about just over 50% said that children might miss a break due to these things. In terms of results from the pupil survey, over 80% of pupils said that they'd experienced missing part of a break or full break, and this was largely due to other pupils' behaviour, not necessarily their own. So there's a high proportion, I think it was nearly 50% reported that when they had missed a break, it was due to other people. More than a quarter said that they'd missed break to either complete homework or classwork. So we don't really know enough about which children miss breaks and how regularly. It's likely that some children miss out from time to time, but it might be that particular children miss out more regularly or at regular intervals. So one of my doctoral students has been doing some research on internal exclusion within secondary schools, and one of the things that she's found is that those children on an internal exclusion tend to miss all of their break and lunch times. They have very little time, certainly not with other pupils. Okay, moving on to think about break time supervision. So we can see here two images of adults supervising on the playground. We've got in our the right image, we've got an adult who is kind of supervising at a distance. And then in the left image, we've got adults sort of participating in the activities. And in some cases, certainly in places like the States, it's a common place for staff to set up activities that children are then required to participate in. There are some really interesting findings in relation to supervision. So I've only presented the data here in relation to morning breaks, but we've got the different types of staff and we've got the different surveys here and split by primary and secondary. And what you should be able to see is that, since 1995 and 2006, the numbers of teaching staff and the numbers of support staff have increased on playgrounds as part of supervision. There's been, and in turn, there's been a kind of a steady reduction in the ratios of pupils to adults, especially since 2006. But it's true to say that most primary schools kind of supervision involves supervision from a distance, although I think it was getting on for about 40% indicated that they organised activities for young people to engage in, and around about 2% of primary schools in particular said that they provided a menu of structured activities that children had to participate in. So very small numbers, but nevertheless existent. In terms of the perceived value of break times, these are the views from senior staff in schools. So in terms of the priorities, the school staff highlighted, or I suppose differed slightly across the primary and secondary phase. But principally, the staff valued breaks in terms of the time it offers children to get physical exercise, followed by opportunity to be with friends. Things that were less mentioned were the freedom for undirected recreation and opportunity to relax and so on. In secondary schools, the kind of principal valuing of school break and lunch times was to eat and drink, followed by time with friends, and then physical exercise. Okay, by contrast, and in terms of pupil views about breaks, our data show that the vast majority of children valued break times principally in terms of the opportunity it provided them to be with friends. So that was the main valuing, or the main reason that children enjoyed breaks. This is followed by the free time that is afforded by these break times to do what they want, or to choose activities and games to participate in. Physical exercise comes very low down in terms of the values. Secondary pupils seem to enjoy eating and drinking and socializing at the same time, and that was flagged up a bit more than primary schools. And our case studies actually found that during lunchtime, it is actually the social side that takes priority over and above eating and drinking. So some children will happily miss the opportunity to eat a meal at lunchtime in order to be with their friends, and that was observed on fairly regular occasions in the case studies. So there's some conflict then in the kind of the valuing and the understanding of the values of breaks as perceived by adults and students themselves, with adults tending to emphasize the more satisfaction of kind of functional needs than students themselves. Okay, I'm short of time, so I'm not going to go into the challenges, but I suppose another key aspect from the pupil survey of children's social lives in school and out of school relates to these two graphs here. So there were a number of areas that we looked at in terms of children's social lives after or outside of school, and we found things like after the attendance of after school clubs had declined quite substantially between 2006 and 2017. So nearly halved, I think. And also we found out where children went after school on the day before they completed the survey. And it showed that over time that there was much less socializing with peers and friends after school between 2006 and 2017. So these graphs, they kind of probably provide the clearest information. And they show how often children get together with peers and friends outside of school. And what you can see is that there has been a decline. So this is for year 5 pupils. There's been a decline in kind of regularly meeting up with peers, and then there's an increase in less regularly meeting up with peers and friends. And the same pattern is found for students in years 8 and year 10. So there is a decline in seeing friends regularly outside of school. In 2006, 15% of children saw friends less than once a week, and now that figure is closer to 31%. And of course, you know, the obvious indication here is that it's something to do with students meeting online, although you know, it's possibly unlikely that year 5 children will be meeting with peers that often online. But what this means is that in many respects, children are missing out on direct and sustained interaction, physical contact, eye contact, and all of the things that are important for developing relationships and developing social skills and social support and things like that. Okay, just a few moments more. So I think what this does is speaks to the unique importance of school break times in the lives of modern children and young people. Break times are universal opportunities for children to meet with and to engage with peers and friends, and are key sites for the development of these social skills. So they might actually be more important now than they ever have been, and certainly within this kind of COVID context. Okay, just some conclusions and implications. So I think drawing on those kind of results, there needs to be some recognition by school staff of the contributions of break times for children's development. These are important social times, and in many respects they need to be protected. Staff and adult anxieties about risk and possibly poor behaviour may lead supervisors to limit or manage pupils' play and socialisation. And there may need to be kind of more effective ways to manage children's poor behaviours and to help them complete their work and learning. In terms of some implications for policymakers, policymakers and schools should legislate, I think, for time for pupils to have break times, and certainly schools should introduce a break time policy. It's important that children have a right to breaks in a similar way to the way that teachers do. Schools should avoid cutting breaks further, but this it's important to remember that this is not just about the time, this is also about the quality of the experience. So ensuring positive and good quality play and break time experiences are really important. And schools should reconsider the practice of withholding breaks. This is in many respects might be counterproductive to positive teacher-pupil relationships, and certainly is not a good way to encourage feelings of school belonging and children feeling included in school. So it's worthwhile schools having a debate and discussion about these sort of practices.